After crashing into the imposing warlord, Brad readies himself for a fight against Rando and his soldiers, hoping to escape the fate that befell the men who were massacred by the group just moments ago. The caped giant walks over to one of his men, whispers in his ear, and he delivers Rando's message. Rando is sorry. He's sorry for ruining Brad's bike, and to make up for it, he's going to give Brad all of their food as a peace offering. Brad is confused at this. He should be the one asking forgiveness for crashing into Rando, not the other way around. Why does Rando feel the need to apologize? As Rando passes him to leave, Brad then notices something even stranger. There are tears falling beneath Rando's mask. Brad realizes there's more to the ferocious warlord underneath that red mask of his, a side of compassion and forgiveness. Rando's apologetic nature isn't shared with his men, however, as after he rides away, his soldiers reveal they have no intention with leaving their rations with Brad and try to steal them back, prompting Brad to kill them where they stand. He continues on, passing a strange man in a cave. When Brad exits the cave, the man, along with some of his cronies, abduct him, taking him to their hideout where they force him to choose one of his companions to play Russian roulette with them. Depending on their luck, they might get away with their lives or die entertaining the crowd. After 3 wins, the man allows Brad to leave. He ends up on the path he was on before, coming upon a man dressed as a snake opposite a man in red. The snake man screams he will end him with his serious snake slaps, but the man in red tells him that won't happen because of something he calls the Salvation Rangers. And then Brad notices the man isn't alone. There are other men behind him, each dressed in another color, and they introduce themselves as the Salvation Rangers, each striking a unique pose when it comes to his turn. All except for Pink. Hungover, he's completely disinterested in participating in the Rangers Theater, much to Red's consternation. When Red continues to nag him, Pink just straight up leaves, leaving the Salvation Rangers unable to complete their ultimate pose and at a loss of what to do next. It's at this point that Brad walks up and defeats Blake the Snake in combat, forcing him to flee. The Rangers thank Brad for his contribution, but advise him to leave the battle for the heroes next time. Then they vanish, leaving Brad to continue on his journey, but not before he notices the trumpet-playing man in the polka-dotted poncho again. The man doesn't seem to notice him this time, however, so Brad leaves him alone to play his song. He proceeds until reaching a blockade set up by the Rando army. They tell him they're not letting anyone through because of the girl seen in the area. Knowing they must be referring to Buddy, Brad heads back and hears from a nearby man that he saw her run into a cave with a weenie-headed man. But the Rando army set off TNT, causing rocks to block the entrance to the cave. Figuring there must be a way around through some other caves, Brad determines to find more TNT to destroy some of the smaller rocks that block the openings to the other passages. While searching, Brad traverses through a swamp, and briefly believes he sees his father, but he's gone. Maybe he's just second-guessing himself. But that's when he's thrust back into another flashback. It's another memory from before the flash when he was a martial arts teacher. He pops a painkiller and then approaches his students, whom are all children. Brad ends class, and a couple of his students notice something seems off about him. But the third, a boy with blonde hair, simply stands in silence. Brad has noticed this student has been upset and asks if everything's okay, but the boy doesn't answer. Brad leaves his students and sees a young boy hiding behind a tree. He approaches him, and the boy assures he wasn't watching, but Brad says it's okay, that he sees him here all the time. Brad invites him to come to class sometime, but the boy says he doesn't have any money. Brad, perhaps feeling pity for him, tells him that's okay, that he can still join. The boy is immensely grateful, yet doubts his ability, but Brad, perhaps sensing some untapped potential, merely says they'll see how good he can be. Brad's mind then returns him to the swamp he left in the real world. Brad manages to find some TNT after he fights his way through a construction crew, and using it, he blasts the rocks that are blocking some of the caves in an attempt to find a way around to Buddy. As he emerges from one cave, he comes upon something he hasn't seen in Olathe in a number of years. A field of grass with flowers sprouting out of it. But this peaceful scene holds a grisly blemish. Brad finds a man hanging from a gallows. The hanged man serves as a sort of gargoyle to a seemingly nice neighborhood, the kind that used to stand before the Flash. This neighborhood is anything but nice, however, as it has fallen into ruins, and the inside of the houses are stained with blood, some of which has been formed into sinister thoughts. Interestingly, Brad finds posters with the word joy on top of them. He can't read most of them due to the blood splattered on them, but does find one that is somewhat legible that holds the complaints of a researcher who is sick of the work being done here. He calls a Dr. Yado a madman, complains of polka dots, and finishes by saying wars shouldn't be fought this way. Brad wonders at this and explores more of the area, coming upon a deeply unsettling sight. He finds an emaciated ghoul covered in scars and blood, and when he walks past it, it attacks with a heavily violent passion. He's never seen anything like this before, and finds the neighborhood houses more of these creeps. Yet in the basement of another house, he finds a monster that's reminiscent of something he's seen before. It reminds him of the mutants he fought earlier, the ones that swelled in size and were distorted in shape. And like those mutants, when killed, this monster drops joy. Behind the monster are research notes from a man named Dr. Lamont, who talks about a project centered on joy led by Dr. Yado, the same man mentioned earlier. The project was apparently a complete failure due to having no military benefit. The notes soon devolve into nonsensical gibberish, but not before the emergence of a heavily violent feeling directed towards her. Brad's discovery of joy's intended use as a military weapon raises questions in his head. The joy he's taken is addictive and can make you feel powerful. So how exactly did it fail? Were the unsuccessful experiments that took place here for a different iteration of the drug? Or does it have something to do with the gruesome monsters he's been seeing throughout the neighborhood? Exploring to find more answers, Brad finds a metal door in the mountainside on the outskirts of the subdivision that has the word joy upon it. And lying on the ground next to it is one of the joy masks worn by the followers of Buzzo. Brad passes through the metal doors to find a lab of sorts, but it's completely infested with creeps. Fighting through them, he comes to a room with large vats that hold various specimens in suspended animation, each with their own unique descriptors. One specimen has a warped face and is named Mindless Sheep, while the next is a mix between fish and man that is referred to as Repulsive Waste. The third contains one of the creeps and is named Violent Soldiers, while the last holds one of the mutants Brad has seen before and is called My Favorite. Brad wonders what connections the joy experiments have with these mutations, so he continues through the lab until reaching a small room in the back, where he finds a note that simply says, "Sorry, darling, but my actions are just." Lying close by is a bloody body, and Brad is astonished to notice it's the body of a woman. Brad wonders at this marvel, about who this woman could be, about how long she's been here. He wonders how she died. Was she killed by the writer of the note, or did she write it before committing suicide to oppose the joy experiments taking place here? Brad ponders these questions as he looks over the woman. Her long black hair reminds him of Buddy's own hair, and how he won't let anybody put their hands on it. Realizing he needs to be on his way, he turns his back to this mystery and sets out to find his daughter. Clearing out some more rocks, Brad finds a small community that reveres some sort of god. He eventually comes upon a coming-of-age ritual where a young boy orders food from an intercom in a process very similar to ordering from a fast food restaurant, and his order floats down from the sky in a heavenly display, showing why this community reveres this entity. Brad climbs this mountain, where he finds a restaurant at the top. The door has a simple warning written in what seems to be raw meat or possibly blood. But Brad disregards the warning, entering the building where he's greeted with a disturbing laugh. He passes the piles of raw meat to find Wally, the restaurant's mascot, in the back. Wally begins to greet him, but then flips, saying he can't be here. His erratic speech moves between hostility and pleasantness until he begs Brad to kill him. Brad fulfills the wish of the tortured mascot and passes into the cave behind him. A cave filled with spiders that have the face of his father. Brad gets through either by fighting or avoiding the horrors, coming to a mountaintop being pounded by a thunderstorm. But it ceases when Brad finally finds a trace of Buddy. Her mask is hanging on a dead tree. Figuring she must be close, he picks up the mask and enters the small cave close by, where he is finally reunited with his daughter. She's surprised to see him and asks him where Sticky and Rick are. Brad lies, saying he doesn't know, and tells Buddy they need to go, that she isn't safe out here. Buddy resists and reveals she knows what's going on. Rick and Sticky told her everything, how she's possibly the last woman left in the entire world, and the only hope for the human race to continue. She tells Brad that people need her, that they care about her, something he never did. Brad professes that he does care, which is why he's there to save her, so that things can go back to normal. But Buddy refuses him, saying she has a new life now. Brad still tries to dissuade her, telling her that she's just a girl, the only girl left, that she doesn't know what's going to happen to her, and she's not ready for the world. But Buddy says she is because Uncle Sticky showed her. Brad thinks the worst of this, that Sticky manipulated Buddy to satisfy his sexual urges, and enraged, presses Buddy for answers, to know what Sticky did to her. But Buddy clams up and says Sticky didn't do anything. Brad ends the conversation, gives Buddy her mask back, and sets out to return home. But as soon as Brad exits the cave, someone in a joy mask knocks him out. He awakes, surrounded by Buzzo and his masked men. Buzzo greets Brad by asking if he can feel the joy. He then turns his attention to Buddy and asks her the same thing. Brad warns Buzzo to stay away from her, and Buzzo wants to know why. He asks if Brad wants her, but when Brad remains silent, Buzzo seems to pick up on the source of Brad's protectiveness, and his sinister smile stretches across his face. He poses the same question to Buddy, and after she says yes, he asks what he is to her. Her response? I don't know anymore. Seemingly in an attempt to turn her away from Brad, he tells Buddy that Brad is a sick man and to stay away from him. He pulls Joy from his pocket and tells her Brad loves these little blue pills, turning to Brad to taunt his addiction. He presses Brad to take the pills so Buddy can see how disgusting he really is. But Brad refuses, knowing it'll turn her against him. Intending to get what he wants, one of Buzzo's men smacks Buddy in the head with a pipe, coercing Brad to finally give in so that Buddy isn't hurt anymore. Buzzo menacingly assures Brad that he's not after her. Brad takes a pill, and at Buzzo's insistence takes another, and another. He feels the drug take its familiar hold and begins to pass out, apologizing to Buddy before falling over. Before losing consciousness completely, he sees Sticky arrive with soldiers of randos. Brad finds himself in a dark void and stumbles across bloody water until coming to a strange, fleshy pillar. He climbs some nearby platforms and finds the top of the pillar has the face of Sticky. He justifies himself to Brad about what he did to Buddy, saying she's getting older and someone needed to show her. And Brad just isn't capable of doing that. The joy Brad was forced to take has put him in a nightmare, fueled by his fear of what he believes Sticky showed Buddy. In a fit of joyful rage, Brad tears down the phallic monolith, awakening him from his joy-induced nightmare. He finds a fight broke out amongst the Rando soldiers and the masked men. A dying Rando soldier tells him the rest of the masked men were headed for their blockade. Brad gives chase, finding the blockade is gone, replaced by the corpses of those that fell in the fighting. As he tries to continue, he's stopped by his childhood bully, Christopher Columbo, and his gents. Columbo flashes Buddy's mask, prompting Brad to yell out in anger. Columbo indicates he doesn't have Buddy, but intends to pursue her, seeking his gents, and if forsaken earlier in the game, Terry Hintz, who now goes as Terrible Terry, onto Brad. Brad kills his childhood bullies and then chases after Columbo. Passing through caves, he suddenly ends up in the interior of a building. A man standing close by asks if Brad was one of her friends. He mumbles, "Poor girl." then comments that Brad is the only one that's turned up to the service. Confused, Brad walks to the head of the room, passing empty pews, coming to a closed coffin bordered by white flowers. As he stoically looks down at it, he knows it's her coffin. Brad doesn't stay long, but as he goes to leave, he finds the room has turned into a long hallway and is now covered in goopy flesh. He finds a small hole at the hall's end, which takes him to the path he was on before. He eventually comes upon a bloodied and battered Sticky, who is amazed by Buddy's resiliency. When Brad calls him by his real name, Sticky is reminded of his father, which in turn reminds him of why he and Brad clicked. They were both children abused by their fathers, and so understood each other like no one else did. But Sticky points out a difference between them. He kept his chin up, while Brad fell down. Sticky tries to appeal to Brad, asking him about survival, about brotherhood. But Brad says he doesn't care about any of that anymore. He only cares about Buddy, his daughter, his second chance. Aggravated with his answer, Sticky tells Brad Buddy wasn't a gift for him. She was a gift for the world, and he's just not man enough to do what needs to be done. But assures Brad he's made sure the world is safe. Brad readies a fireball to execute Sticky, but Rick comes running in, throwing himself between them, and begs Brad to spare him. Depending on the choice of the player, Brad either eviscerates both of them, or tells them to leave and never show their face again. If the latter choice is made, Sticky warns Brad that things aren't over between them, and the two vanish. As Brad tries to track down Buddy, he's suddenly ambushed by Buzzo's masked men, and Brad again finds himself at the mercy of Buzzo. He pulls forth Buddy and again asks if Brad knows her. Buzzo reveals that he does, and that he never wanted her here. But since she's here, he's going to use her as a tool to show Brad what it feels like. Brad's response prompts Buzzo to note how much different he is, but that he still hasn't suffered enough. To torment him even further, Buzzo tells Brad he wants him to make a choice. Either the lives of his companions who are holding him back from being truly joyful, or Buddy's nipple. Based on Brad's choice, either 3 of his companions die right there, or Buddy's nipple is chopped off and given to him as a memento so that he never forgets the feeling he has right now. Afterwards, Buzzo and his men vanish, but they don't get very far until Brad finds Buzzo again, this time empty-handed. Buddy was able to escape him. Buzzo is impressed with her, commenting how she'd have been a real asset with the women. Brad questions the meaning behind his words, but Buzzo dismisses him, saying it's not for his kind. He then tells Brad he's happy that he's been taking joy, and if Brad says he hasn't, Buzzo says he's made sure it doesn't matter at this point. And it's a good thing, because ultimately, he gets to play with Brad longer, but laments to himself that no matter what he does, it still hurts. So he concludes that Brad hasn't suffered enough for what he did to her. As one of his men approaches holding a gun, Buzzo forces Brad to make another tough choice. It's either his arm or all of his possessions. Brad also has an option to try and understand Buzzo, to question why he's doing this to him. But if he does so, Buzzo answers him by calling him a murderer and taking all of his items as well as his arm. This is a lose-lose situation for Brad. He will walk away from this encounter without an arm, without all of his items, or both. Left alone on the clifftop, Brad again gives chase to find his daughter, and while doing so, considers everything that's happened recently. He thinks of the creeps and the monster he found in that ruined neighborhood, wondering what could have created those monstrosities. He then remembers the experiments with Joy that took place there, and wonders if Joy could have been responsible for creating those mutants. Is something similar going to happen to him? After all, he's been taking the drug for years. He then remembers the Joy mask he saw outside of the Joy lab he found. It's the same mask that Buzzo's followers wear. Is it possible that Buzzo was involved in the experiments that took place there? Does he know more about the drug and its effects? Or is that merely where he found all the joy he gives to Brad? Brad then wonders why Buzzo is so determined on tormenting him. He did say the two of them go way back, so could it be something from their past? Brad then remembers what Buzzo said before, that Brad hasn't suffered enough for what he did to her. Could he mean Buddy? Or is it possible that he means... On the opposite end of the spectrum from Buzzo is Rando, who showed Brad compassion and forgiveness in their brief encounter. For a moment, Brad considers the possibility that Sticky and Rick could be right, that Buddy would be safer with Rando and his army. But then he remembers the truck filled with bloody corpses, and realizes that while capable of compassion, Rando is also capable of cruelty. No, Brad knows there's only one person that can truly keep Buddy safe: himself. His resolve steeled, Brad continues on his journey, and in the distance sees a man standing on a shore looking through a telescope, muttering to himself that the girl stole his boat.